Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video we're going to be kickstarting what is hopefully a long running series over on the channel, and that is essentially taking 5 Studio Series figures and comparing them next to either their original versions or just a version that came out before the Studio Series version. Now of course this line has in fact perfected so many designs over the years, and I've cherry picked 5 of what I believe are some of the best figures that we've gotten from this line so far, and I'm actually really excited to be able to compare them next to some of their original counterparts. Now considering this is a first series, I have decided to pick the first 5, but for the next episode I would love to know down in the comment section below what 5 characters would you guys like me to see actually bring out the previous counterparts or original versions of and compare them next to the newer versions. So would you like me to perhaps take a look at a version of Optimus Prime or another version of Megatron, or pretty much any of the other Studio Series figures that are out there, with the exception of the Bumblebee movie, just as sadly that movie came out when the Studio Series was running, so we never actually got an almost first run of those guys. Now I actually think this is going to be a really interesting series, as of course not all of the figures in this line are in fact a vast improvement when in comparison to their original counterparts. Some which spring to mind straight away are the likes of the Revenge of the Fallen Soundwave. I'm very torn as to whether or not the original version is better than the newer version, or even the Revenge of the Fallen Mixmaster. I absolutely love that Voyager class figure, and in my opinion it may just even be slightly better than the Studio Series version. So some of my thoughts on these figures that I shall be discussing in these episodes, you guys may not even agree with me on, but I'd love to know down in the comment section below on what you guys think. So without further ado, we'll kickstart this series off by taking a look at the Studio Series Starscream and comparing it next to its original 2007 counterpart. And my goodness, what a pick to start off with. So of course we've got the Studio Series Starscream on the right and the original 2007 version on the left, and you can already see the stark difference. Honestly, the Studio Series version absolutely obliterates the original counterpart. Now bearing in mind there is roughly 10 to 11 years between the releases, so the engineering over time has drastically improved. Even between this guy and the Hunt for the Decepticons leader class figure, it was just leaps and bounds more accurate. But it's actually really interesting to see as to where we started and to where we are now. Now this guy, to be completely honest with you, when comparing this to this figure, actually looks rather cartoonish, especially where that head sculpt is concerned. Now I imagine the designers at Hasbro were basing this off of incredibly early concept art. This was the first time that they ever approached the live action movie design, so you do have to give credit where it's due, but honestly the design is just way off, and so is the colour scheme. They have decided to go with this almost brownish colour scheme for Starscream, when in reality he was more of a grey colour like we have got here with the Studio Series version. Now this character also doesn't in fact have any humanoid hands, so we do merely just get these blasters. He did come with a total of 6 missiles. For the purposes of this review I have merely only left 3 in this arm just to demonstrate its functionality, and to be fair, whilst it may be inaccurate, it's actually a really awesome feature. So if we spin our attention here around to the back and actually toggle this switch, it will cause the missile barge to in fact rotate, and with it the actual missiles should, I believe, actually fire into place like so. So you see there, you just rotate them and they completely shoot out, which is super awesome, and it is in fact actually sculpted really well, but of course completely inaccurate to the movie. Now as we bring these guys in here for a closer look, you can see, my goodness, the face sculpts are just leaps and bounds between each other. This one is just so much better. The torso design, the accuracy to the movie is really awesome, but you can just see there the torso is just so different, as so is that color. Even as we turn our attention to the legs, these ones are so much more accurate to the movie. To be completely honest though, I do in fact actually prefer the design that we've got going on here for the foot. I've never really been a huge fan of actually having the landing gear here as the heel spur for Starscream, and as we just spin our attention here to the back, to be completely honest, I'd say that they're roughly even in terms of how the actual kibble management goes. This one is pretty decent. Of course we've got the nose cone, but this one has this huge flap here that sticks behind the head, so personally I think they are in fact equal where that is concerned. And one thing that I'm noticing is the disparity in terms of the plastic. This feels so much lighter when in comparison to this older guy, and considering this is like well over a decade, this has held up impeccably well. So I'll really love to see in 10 to 11 years time how this guy does in fact stack up, as the plastic does feel very thin on him, and if memory serves me correctly, I have in fact actually got a cracked area, I believe it's on one of the wings, which definitely isn't a good sign at all. So when comparing these, there's no doubt whatsoever in which one is more accurate, but in terms of the quality, the plastic, and even some of the gimmicks, I do think that maybe the 2007 one just ever so slightly has the upper hand. Here for another figure of which was vastly upgraded by the Studio Series, who we've got the ROTF Studio Series Voyager Megatron on the right and the original mold on the left. Now bearing in mind this is the reissued version for Movie the Best, so it's got the really nice metallic silver colour scheme, but originally this guy was in fact released in this really weird green colour, which was just completely inaccurate to the film, and honestly if I had this figure in I would be absolutely obliterating it for its colour scheme. So in a way, with this Movie the Best colour scheme, I am slightly more reluctant to in fact actually bash the colour difference, as I do in fact actually prefer the silver that we've got going on for this when in comparison to the dark grey great, but just in terms of a mold, my goodness, much like the Starscream, they really do look like completely different designs. This guy had one heck of a backpack, and considering that he was released in Revenge of the Fallen, arguably one of the holy grail eras for Transformers, it really is crazy to me to see that this version is in fact so much more superior when in comparison to this original ROTF mold. You can see as we turn our attention to the side, we've actually got the turbine sculpted, the proportions, the actual details, such as the thrusters here on the hips, is in fact incredibly accurate to the movie. And as we actually flip here to the front, one thing that no original 2009 Megatron could in fact get right were the arms. The leader class figure had terrible arms, and so did the Voyager. You can see here the fusion cannon, whilst doesn't look terrible, definitely doesn't look nowhere near as good as we actually got here with this new version. And even here for this claw arm, once more, this Studio Series version just absolutely knocked it out of the park. Now this one did in fact have a missile gimmick, but in terms of the actual sculpt work, the finger detail was so weak. You can in fact pick out some slight finger detail, but honestly, it really is quite poor in my opinion. Now, as we take a look here towards the torso, you can see we of course do have some nice paint, but once again, this is the MB version and not the original release, so I am trying to think of this in the green color scheme, and to be honest with you, I'd absolutely hate it. But you can see, considering this was Mecha Live, as we actually rotated the waist, some of the cogs that are in fact situated within the torso did in fact rotate, which was a really nice gimmick. And he also had a gimmick here with this arm, whereas if you did in fact raise the elbow, you can see the claw would in fact shoot forwards, which was cool, but every now and again did become quite a bit of a hassle, especially if you just wanted the arm straightened without in fact actually having the claw deployed, or vice versa. If you wanted the arm in fact retracted and wanted the blade pull forward, you would in fact essentially have to damage the cog mechanism. So once again, the Studio Series version just absolutely annihilates it. Even there, in regards to the head sculpt, this one is just so much better. It would just be cool once more to get this guy maybe done in a metallic silver, but considering that Takara are in fact bringing out a premium finish line, maybe we would in fact actually see this guy in a more movie accurate color scheme. But there is no doubt at all, in terms of the design, this one absolutely abolishes the original version. Now with that being said, despite me not actually showing alt modes in these videos, I do in fact actually think the original ROTF figure does it better for the tank mode when in comparison to this guy. Hasbro and Takara decided to just merely give him a tank form, whereas in ROTF he was more of a tank slash jet, and that is definitely the vibe that I get from this figure. So in terms of alt modes, if you wanted to have both of these in the collection, then maybe display this one here in the alt mode, and of course keep this guy in the robot mode. But just proportions wise, he just wins hands down. You can see here from the legs, the way the treads are in fact stacked up, as well as the detail, it just is so well done. They really did a fantastic job, and the complexity to the conversion for this figure actually isn't that bad at all. So once again, hats off to Hasbro, they definitely did massively improve over time. And a comparison that I really wanted to showcase in this video was between the Studio Series Ironhide and the Dark of the Moon Voyager class Ironhide. Now I would have absolutely loved to have in fact actually showcased this Studio Series version next to the original 2007 Voyager, but I actually don't own that in the collection, and this is as close as I've actually got to an older version of Ironhide without bringing in the leader class. And I've tried my best to in fact not include leader figures in this comparison, just as they have a much higher budget, and of course considering their larger scale, we're able to achieve a little more. So these are in fact two Voyagers. This was the most recent Voyager up until this guy's release, and you can see that they just did an absolute stellar job. So this one came out in 2011, whereas this one came out I believe in 2018, and my goodness, the differences are just so incredible. Now bearing in mind, I do in fact actually believe this figure here by the Studio Series to be better than the movie masterpiece figure, just overall in terms of functionality, enjoyability, and how this one actually holds together. I think this one is fantastic. So when you actually compare this here to this Voyager figure, the old 2011 version, I think it absolutely obliterates it, not only in terms of the overall proportions, but the head sculpt, the attention to detail on the Studio Series version is just incredible. You can see there how we have in fact got the asymmetrical design going on for the eyes, whereas this one was completely symmetrical, which was inaccurate, and considering this was a detail that was present from day one with Ironhide from the 2007 movie, why Hasbro didn't implement that onto this 2011 Voyager is completely beyond me. I thought the torso was an absolute mess. Pretty much any Ironhide figure up until the DOTM leader had a terrible chest design, and this one here is no exception, whereas the Studio Series version absolutely perfected that. This is in fact the best chest that I think we've ever gotten from Ironhide, period. You can see here the only area which is slightly lacking on this guy is the fact that the bumper doesn't transform, but if you bought the DNA design kit, that was something that did rectify. You can see here in terms of the cannons, we did in fact have a mech tech gimmick going on with this line, so in some ways I can kind of excuse this one not having super movie accurate cannons, but if you were going on accuracy, once more, the Studio Series version just wins hands down. And just check out the proportions. The legs are just so much more accurate on this guy when in comparison to this guy, and not to mention the color scheme as well. Ironhide in the movie was always gunmetal slash black, so why on earth this guy's got almost this greyish blue tone going on is completely beyond me. And then as we spin our attention here to the back, it's just an absolute kibble fest. They really didn't know how to orientate these shoulder pieces, whereas this guy guy had it down to a T. Just overall, such a perfect figure, such an upgrade, and this is definitely an instance where the Studio Series version is vastly superior when in comparison to pretty much any of the releases that came before. So moving on to the second to last figure that I shall be discussing in this video, and my goodness do we have an absolute whopper, probably a prime example of the Studio Series version being vastly superior when in comparison to the predecessor. Here we've got Blackout slash Grindor. Now of course this is in fact the Grindor reissue with a slightly different colour variation, but it's essentially exactly the same as the Blackout, and oh my goodness, if there was one figure that I would want a re-release of, it was Blackout. For so many years I wanted Hasbro to redo Blackout, as none of us was satisfied with that dreadful Voyager that we got released originally in 2007, and for so many years this literally was the only Blackout that we owned in our collection until 2018. Over a decade on since Blackout made his debut on the silver screen, we actually got probably the best Blackout we will ever get, that being the Studio Series version, and you can see even just by this comparison frame alone, the Studio Series version absolutely knocks it out of the park. The attention to detail, the actual level of accuracy they were able to come to capturing his appearance from the movie is just sublime, not to mention that he had a very awesome helicopter mode, and he was finally a leader class. Now bearing in mind he was a Studio Series leader class who wasn't as big as some of those previous movie leaders that we got, but still I definitely wasn't complaining at all. You can see in terms of the actual accuracy, my goodness was this figure in a league of its own. I still think even to this day that the actual Studio Series Blackout mold is by far one of the best figures that we've ever got, and you can just see in terms of the leg design, it just annihilates the Voyager class figure. The arm design annihilates the Voyager class figure. The torso, this entire upper section is just so much better, and as we spin our attention here to the back, as so is the kibble management. This has got no kibble dangling between the legs, whereas this one had literally half the helicopter actually attached, and it was so bad that Hasbro did in fact actually engineer a gimmick where you could in fact detach this, as they knew themselves that this was just so awful. Why this guy never got a leader class in the original movie line is completely beyond me, considering he was one of the biggest characters that the actual Bayverse ever produced. I just really have no words. I'm just so grateful for the Studio Series version. You can see as we actually take a look here at the head sculpt, this particular version is just so highly detailed. You can see the crest design to the head looks fantastic, whereas you bring this in, it's just absolutely terrible. It looks like an awful Decepticon protoform, and nothing like how Blackout actually looked in the movie. Now once more, this was the first time that they ever actually approached to do live action movie figures, and of course this was one of the first ever live action characters to appear on the silver screen, so I guess in some ways you do have to give Hasbro credit where it's due, but honestly they had so many years where they could in fact actually perfect this character design, and they decided to leave it until 2018, and in some ways I am in fact actually glad they did, as this Studio Series version is just so awesome. You can see here for the legs, once more so accurate to the movie, the way they proportion. You've got that classic Michael Bay Decepticon chicken leg design, whereas this one literally had nothing of which resembled that. You can see the detailing on this one is so much better, and considering this is Grindor, it does in fact have the articulated fingers, which when comparing here to the original version, once more just absolutely obliterates the older release. So if you have any of these in the collection, and maybe you don't in fact actually own a Studio Series version of Blackout slash Grindor, then you absolutely need to, as this guy in my opinion is one of the best SS figures that has so far ever been produced. And so moving on to the final figure that we'll be discussing for this particular part, here we have what is probably one of the best upgrades that we have got from the Studio Series so far. Honestly, this guy literally is in a league of his own, even maybe being better than the Blackout slash Grindor mold, and that is the Studio Series Age of Extinction Grimlock. When in comparison to the original Grimlock Voyager figure that we got, this one absolutely destroys it. It literally chews it up and spits it out. You can just see here, just comparing the robot modes, they literally look as if though they're from completely different continuities. This one truly looks as if though perhaps it's from a cartoon series, definitely not the live action movies, whereas this one looks as if though it's been ripped straight out of Age of Extinction. The attention to detail, the sculpt work, the paint work on this really was probably some of the best we've ever seen. In terms of paint, I think it's by far one of the best painted mass-produced Transformers ever out there. It really is fantastic. Now, bearing in mind, I do have some of the DNA design upgrade pieces actually implemented onto him, but with no doubt, without those, it would still make it onto this list and would still, no doubt, absolutely destroy this version. Now, bearing in mind, this isn't the first run. This is, in fact, Transformers 5, so we've got a slightly more gunmetal silver color scheme, when in comparison to this really ghastly orange that we got in AOE. But as you actually take a look here at the design of this, you can just see that it was incredibly cartoonified. Now, it is, unfortunately, very dusty. I do apologize for that, but you can just see the head sculpt really didn't look all that accurate to the movie. The actual T-Rex head as well looked incredibly cartoonish, nowhere near as menacing as we actually saw in the film. He had these really awful arms, so you can see we've got half of the T-Rex leg actually slapped here onto the forearm. I didn't necessarily think the legs looked all that great. You can see they're very lanky, not much mass to them at all, and as we spin around here to the back, he's literally got the jaw as a butt, which is just really, really unusual. Once more, they could have found a better way to, in fact, actually place this here at the top, but they decided not to. This was just such a bad figure, and once again, done in the original orange, was just a major departure from what we saw in the movie, until this figure came along and absolutely turned the Grimlock game on its head, as this one is just so movie accurate. The attention to detail, the sculpt work, as well as the paint. I'll just rise the camera up so we can better appreciate some of the sharper details of that face sculpt. You can see there, it just looks exceptional. The actual T-Rex heads there look fantastic, and he does in fact have a complete faux T-Rex head. So this one is in fact the real one that you'll use for the dino mode, whereas this one just literally stores on the underside of the T-Rex, which is just exceptional. The way they in fact actually managed to get 2 T-Rex heads which were complete on this figure is just sublime. You can see the paintwork once again is fantastic. Literally no kibble on this guy at all. The back looks so nice. We've even got here this almost knight-esque skirt piece going on, which is incredibly accurate to the movie, and you can just see in terms of the leg design, a lot more bulky, a lot more aggressive, and once more painted so much better when in comparison to this figure. And just taking a closer look here at the actual details of the face sculpt, once more, the Age of Extinction Studio Series version absolutely destroys the old Age of Extinction Voyager class. And so that just about wraps up my video of comparing 5 Studio Series figures and versing them off next to some of their original counterparts. I would love to know down in the comment section below on what you guys thought of this type of video. Is it something that you would like to see more of on the channel? Once again, I'm really hoping to create this as an almost weekly or fortnightly series, so please feel free to also let me know on what 5 Studio Series figures you guys would like me to take a look at next in order to actually compare them or verse them off some of their original counterparts. And I would also be incredibly grateful if you guys could give me some tips on how maybe I can make these types of videos more enjoyable. Is this something that you would just not like to see at all over on the channel, or is it something that you guys would in fact be interested in seeing more of? I would love to know down in the comments as to whether or not you guys agree with my thoughts on some of these figures. Do you think that maybe they are as good as I'm making them out to be when in comparison to their original counterparts, or do you think the original counterparts has the upper hand on this? Once again, there are some really interesting figures that I am hoping to take a look at in the future videos, which may in fact actually be worse when in comparison to their original counterparts, and I'm definitely sure that will make for a very interesting discussion. So once again, please feel free to let me know all of your thoughts down in the comment section below, and until my next video, I'll see you then.